The weight of the manila envelope in my hands might as well have been 1,000 pounds. Inside was the letter I'd been dreading, the final confirmation that my family had once again chosen my sister over me. "I'm sorry, Miss Harlow," Dr. Winters said, his voice gentle but firm. "The test results are conclusive. You're not a match." I looked up at him, forcing myself to maintain composure even as my world crumbled around me. "And my sister?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Serena's results were negative as well." He hesitated. "I understand this is difficult, but without a suitable bone marrow donor, your mother's prognosis is terminal." I finished for him, the word like ash in my mouth. "How long does she have?" 6 months. Maybe less." I nodded, clutching the envelope tighter. My mother was dying, and despite all our differences, despite years of neglect and favoritism, I had been willing to save her. But biology had other plans. "Thank you, doctor," I said, rising from my chair. "I appreciate your candor." As I walked out of the hospital, the autumn wind cut through my coat. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. 3 missed calls from Serena. Of course, she would be the first to know the results. The golden child always had the privilege of information. I dialed her number, bracing myself for the tears, the dramatics that made everyone flock to comfort her. "Olivia," she answered, her voice cracking. "Did you hear? Neither of us matches. Mom's going to die, and there's nothing we can do." "Hello to you too, Serena," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Yes, I just left Dr. Winter's office." "What are we going to do?" she wailed. "Dad's a wreck, and I just can't handle this." I closed my eyes, counting to 10. Always about her. Even our mother's impending death was somehow about Serena's pain, Serena's inability to cope. "We keep looking for a donor," I said practically. "The National Registry. They already checked. No matches." She sniffled loudly. "The only other option would be if Mom had another child somewhere." "But that's ridiculous." I stopped walking, her words hitting me like a physical blow. "What did you just say?" I said it's ridiculous. Mom and Dad have been together since high school. There's no secret love child hidden away somewhere. But there was. And I knew exactly where to find her. "Serena, I need to go," I said abruptly. "I'll call you later." "But Olivia." I hung up, already dialing another number. One I hadn't called in over 15 years. "Archives Department," a bored voice answered. "Yes, this is Olivia Harlow. I need to access a sealed adoption record from 1985. My heart pounded as I said the words aloud for the first time in my adult life. The secret my mother had made me promise never to reveal. The sister no one knew existed. "Ma'am, those records are sealed for a reason." "It's a medical emergency," I cut in. "A matter of life and death." There was a long pause. "You'll need court approval or consent from all parties involved." I closed my eyes, thinking of the teenage girl I'd glimpsed only once. The baby my mother had given away before marrying my father, before having me, and then Serena. The child whose existence had been hidden from everyone except me, and only because I'd accidentally discovered the truth when I was 12. "I understand," I said. "I'll get what I need." As I ended the call, I stood motionless on the sidewalk, people rushing past me in both directions. For years, I'd been the responsible one, the dutiful daughter who did everything right but was never quite good enough. Not compared to perfect, beautiful Serena, who had been the center of my parents' universe since the day she was born. And now, the only person who could save my mother's life was the daughter she'd thrown away. The irony was almost too perfect. I took a deep breath and hailed a cab. JFK Airport, please. Where to? The driver asked. Domestic terminal, I replied. I need to book a flight to Chicago. It was time to find the sister my family had forgotten. But first, I needed to face the man who might know where to find her. I hadn't been back to Chicago in nearly a decade. The city skyline looked both familiar and foreign as my taxi crawled through the evening traffic. Snow had started falling, dusting the streets with a deceptive purity that made everything look softer, cleaner than it actually was. Just like my family's image. This is it, the driver announced, pulling up to a modest townhouse in Lincoln Park. You want me to wait? No, I said, handing him cash. I might be a while. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the home of my mother's first love. The man she'd left behind when she'd become pregnant at 17. The father of the child she'd given up for adoption. Michael Crawford had been just a name to me, a shadow in my mother's past, until I'd found that hidden box of letters when I was 12. Letters from a young man begging to see his child. Letters my mother had never answered. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the steps and pressed the doorbell. It took a minute, long enough for me to consider turning around, before the door swung open. A man in his late 50s stood there, salt and pepper hair framing a face that still held traces of the handsome boy in those old photographs. Can I help you? He asked, polite but wary. Mr. Crawford? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. My name is Olivia Harlow. I'm Diane Harlow's daughter. His expression shifted instantly, eyes widening in recognition and something else, pain, perhaps. Diane's daughter, he repeated. I didn't know she had, well. Please, come in. The inside of his home was warm and lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls and the faint smell of coffee hanging in the air. He led me to a small living room and gestured for me to sit. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, I began, perching on the edge of a worn armchair. But it's urgent. Is she okay? The concern in his voice sounded genuine, which surprised me. After everything my mother had done, I'd expected bitterness. No, I said simply. She's dying. Acute myeloid leukemia. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and neither I nor my sister Serena are compatible donors. Michael's face paled. I'm sorry to hear that. Truly. But I don't understand why you've come to me. I met his gaze steadily. I know about your daughter, Mr. Crawford. The baby my mother gave up for adoption in 1985. The room went so quiet I could hear the tick of the clock on the mantel. Michael's hands, resting on his knees, began to tremble slightly. How did you? I found her letters, I explained. When I was 12. The ones you wrote, asking about the baby. Asking to see her. He covered his face with one hand, his shoulders sagging. All these years, I thought. I never knew if she'd even received them. She did. I hesitated. Mr. Crawford, I need to find your daughter. She might be the only person who can save my mother's life. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. Even if I wanted to help you, and I'm not saying I do, I don't know where she is. Diane made sure of that. It was a closed adoption. But you must have tried to find her, I pressed. Over the years. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. Her name is Rebecca, he said quietly, returning to sit beside me. Rebecca Grace Winters. At least, that's what the adoption agency told me when I tracked them down 10 years ago. He opened the album, revealing newspaper clippings, printouts, and handwritten notes. Years of searching, documented meticulously. The last information I had, she was living in Seattle, working as a graphic designer. He pointed to a grainy newspaper photo of a woman receiving an award. That's her, 3 years ago. I stared at the image, searching for resemblances. The woman had dark hair like my mother's, but her smile, that was all Michael. Why are you showing me this? I asked, confused by his willingness to help. After what my mother did. Michael closed the album gently. Because I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. And because Rebecca, she deserves to know where she came from. Even if it's complicated. My mother didn't want her, I said bluntly. She gave her away and pretended she never existed. Is that what you think happened? Michael's voice held a note of surprise. That Diane just didn't want our baby? I frowned. What else could it be? She never spoke of her. She made me promise never to tell anyone what I'd found. Michael shook his head slowly. Your mother was 17, Olivia. Her parents threatened to disown her if she didn't give up the baby. They had her whole life planned out, college, career, marriage to someone suitable. Not the boy from the wrong side of town who got her pregnant. His words forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about my mother. About the choices she'd made. Even so, I said after a moment. She could have told me. Told Serena. Instead, she pretended Rebecca didn't exist. People do strange things out of shame. Out of fear. Michael stood, walking to a desk in the corner. I have Rebecca's last known address and phone number. It's probably out of date, but it's somewhere to start. He scribbled on a notepad and handed it to me. Whatever happens, will you let me know? If you find her? I nodded, folding the paper carefully. I will. As I stood to leave, Michael said, Olivia? When you see Diane, tell her I'm sorry. For everything. I paused at the door. Mr. Crawford? Did you ever stop loving her? My mother? His sad smile was answer enough. Outside, the snow was falling harder now. I pulled out my phone and booked a flight to Seattle for the morning. Then I called Serena. Where have you been? She demanded, her voice shrill with panic. Dad's been trying to reach you for hours. I'm in Chicago, I said, flagging down a taxi. And I might have found a way to save Mom. What are you talking about? The doctors said. There's another potential donor, Serena. Someone we haven't tested yet. Who? I took a deep breath. Our sister. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Olivia, Serena finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. If this is some kind of sick joke. It's not a joke. Mom had a baby before she met Dad. Before either of us was born. She gave her up for adoption. That's impossible. Mom would have told us. No, I said, watching the city lights blur through the taxi window. She wouldn't have. And she didn't. But I'm going to find our sister, and maybe, just maybe, she can save Mom's life. Does Dad know? No. And you can't tell him, not yet. Not until I find her. Serena's breathing was shallow on the other end of the line. This is crazy, Olivia. Completely crazy. Maybe. But it's the only chance Mom has. After I hung up, I leaned back against the seat, exhaustion washing over me. All these years, I'd resented my mother for her preference for Serena, for the way she'd always found me lacking in comparison. I'd resented Serena for being the perfect daughter I could never be. But now I wondered if my mother's critical eye, her constant disappointment in me, had nothing to do with Serena at all. Maybe every time she looked at me, she saw a reminder of the first child she'd given away. The daughter she'd sacrificed for the life she thought she wanted. And maybe finding Rebecca wasn't just about saving my mother's life. Maybe it was about saving all of us. Seattle greeted me with a relentless downpour, the rain hammering against the windows of my rental car as I navigated unfamiliar streets. The address Michael had given me led to a small art gallery in a gentrified industrial district, its windows glowing warm against the gray afternoon. Winter's Design Studio read the sign above the door. I sat in the car, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and rain jackets, wondering what I would say to this woman, this sister I had never known. How do you introduce yourself to someone whose existence had been erased? How do you ask them to save the mother who had abandoned them? Finally, gathering my courage, I stepped out into the rain and pushed open the gallery door. A bell tinkled softly, announcing my arrival. The space was bright and airy, with abstract paintings and photography adorning the walls. A tall woman with dark hair pulled into a messy bun stood with her back to me, adjusting a frame. "Be with you in a minute," she called over her shoulder. I stood, dripping onto the polished concrete floor, heart hammering in my chest. When she turned, I found myself looking into a face that held echoes of my own, the same high cheekbones, the same slight cleft in the chin. "Sorry about that," she said with a smile. "Welcome to Winter's Design. I'm Rebecca. How can I help you?" Rebecca. Hearing her name spoken in her own voice made this surreal situation suddenly, painfully real. "My name is Olivia Harlow," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I think I'm your sister." Rebecca's smile froze, her eyes widening slightly. "Excuse me?" "I know this is shocking," I continued quickly. "And I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important. Desperately important." She took a step back, her professional demeanor slipping. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not a game. Your birth mother is Diane Harlow. Your father is Michael Crawford. You were born in Chicago in 1985 and given up for adoption." Rebecca's face had gone pale. "How do you know this?" "Because Diane is my mother too. And she's dying." A heavy silence fell between us, broken only by the patter of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. "I think you should leave," Rebecca said finally, her voice tight. "Please," I implored, taking a step forward. "Just hear me out. After that, if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. I'll go. But please, just listen." She hesitated, then gestured to a small seating area in the corner of the gallery. 5 minutes. I followed her to the couch, perching on the edge while she stood, arms crossed defensively. Our mother, has acute myeloid leukemia," I began. "She needs a bone marrow transplant, or she'll die. I have another sister, Serena, but neither of us is a compatible donor. You might be her only chance." Rebecca's laugh was bitter, surprising me. "So that's what this is about. You're not here because you want to know me. You're here because you need something from me." "Yes," I admitted. "I am. But that doesn't mean I don't want to know you too." "Really?" Her eyebrow arched skeptically. "After what, 32 years of silence? I'm supposed to believe you suddenly care about your long-lost sister?" "I didn't know about you until I was 12, I said quietly. I found letters your father had written to my mother, begging to see you. She made me promise never to tell anyone what I'd discovered. Rebecca's expression didn't soften. And you kept that promise. Until you needed something. Her words stung because they contained a grain of truth. I had kept my mother's secret, partly out of loyalty, partly out of fear of disrupting the fragile balance of our family. Yes, I acknowledged. I did. And maybe that makes me a terrible person. Maybe I don't deserve your help. But my mother, she doesn't deserve to die. My mother, Rebecca corrected sharply. My mother is Margaret Winters. She raised me, loved me, was there for every skinned knee and broken heart. Diane Harlow is just someone who gave birth to me. I nodded, accepting her anger. I understand. And I'm not asking you to forgive her, or to suddenly see her as your mother. I'm just asking you to consider helping save her life. Rebecca turned away, walking to the window. For a long moment, she stared out at the rain-slicked street, her reflection wavering in the glass. What does she think about this? She finally asked. About you coming here to find me? She doesn't know, I admitted. She's in the hospital. And I haven't told her yet. Rebecca turned back to me, her eyes sharp. So she still doesn't want me to exist. Even now. It's not that simple. I stood, moving closer to her. My mother, she's complicated. She's made mistakes. But I think giving you up might have been the hardest thing she ever did. And yet she did it, Rebecca said flatly. And went on to have a perfect little family without me. The bitterness in her voice was familiar, it echoed the resentment I'd carried for years, watching my mother shower Serena with the affection and approval she'd always withheld from me. It wasn't perfect, I said softly. Not even close. Rebecca studied me for a moment, then walked to a desk and pulled out a business card. This is my cell number. I need time to think about this. To talk to my parents, my adoptive parents, she clarified. I can't just give you an answer right now. I took the card, relief washing over me. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Thank you, I said. For even considering it. As I turned to leave, Rebecca called after me. Olivia? What's she like? Diane. I paused, trying to find words to describe the complex woman who had raised me. She's strong. Determined. She built a successful business from nothing. She loves fiercely, but not always in ways that are easy to recognize. Rebecca nodded, digesting this. And your father? Is he? Robert Harlow. He's not your father, I clarified. Your father is Michael Crawford. He lives in Chicago. He never stopped looking for you. Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, surprise, maybe even hope. He looked for me? For years. He's the one who helped me find you. Rebecca turned away, but not before I caught the sheen of tears in her eyes. I'll call you, she said, her voice thick. Tomorrow, probably. Okay, I said gently. Thank you, Rebecca. Really. Outside, the rain had stopped, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. I sat in my rental car, scrolling through my phone until I found the number I needed. Chicago Memorial Hospital, Oncology Unit, answered a brisk voice. Hi, this is Olivia Harlow. I'd like to speak to Dr. Winters about my mother, Diane Harlow. After a brief hold, the doctor's familiar voice came on the line. Ms. Harlow, I was hoping to hear from you. Your mother's condition has stabilized somewhat, but I may have found a donor, I interrupted. A half-sister. I need to know what the next steps would be if she agrees to be tested. There was a startled pause. A half-sister? This is the first I'm hearing about another sibling. It's complicated. But she exists, and she might be willing to help. What do we do now? As Dr. Winters outlined the process, I stared out at the Seattle skyline, the Space Needle piercing the low-hanging clouds like a beacon. Finding Rebecca had been the easy part, I realized. Convincing her to help was going to be much harder. And telling my mother that I had found the daughter she'd hidden away for over 30 years? That might be the hardest part of all. I spent a restless night in my hotel room, jumping every time my phone buzzed. But it was never Rebecca, just Serena, sending increasingly frantic updates about our mother's condition, or my father, wondering when I was coming home. By morning, I was exhausted but determined. I needed to return to New York, to face my mother and tell her what I'd done. What I'd found. As I was checking out of the hotel, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? It's Rebecca. Her voice sounded strained. Can we meet? I need to talk to you in person. Relief flooded through me. Of course. When and where? There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from my gallery. Café Vita. In an hour? I'll be there. The coffee shop was crowded, filled with the hiss of espresso machines and the murmur of conversation. Rebecca sat in a corner booth, 2 cups already on the table in front of her. She looked different today, more put together, her hair sleek and her clothes polished, as if she'd armored herself for battle. I got you a latte, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. I didn't know what you liked, so. A latte is perfect, I said, touched by the gesture. Thank you. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her own cup. I talked to my parents last night. 4 hours. They knew I'd been looking for my birth parents, but this wasn't how any of us expected it to happen. I'm sorry, I said. For showing up like I did. For the shock. Rebecca waved away my apology. It's not your fault. None of this is. She took a deep breath. I'll do it. I'll get tested to see if I'm a match. It took a moment for her words to register. You will? Rebecca, thank you. I don't know how to. Don't thank me yet, she interrupted. I have conditions. I nodded, prepared for anything. Of course. First, I'm not doing this for Diane. I'm doing it because I couldn't live with myself if I let someone die when I could have helped. I understand. Second, I want to meet Michael Crawford. My father. He wants to meet you too, I assured her. Very much. And third, she continued, her gaze steady, if I'm a match and I go through with the donation, I want the truth. All of it. From Diane. About why she gave me up, why she never looked for me, why she pretended I didn't exist for 32 years. This last condition gave me pause. Not because it was unreasonable, it wasn't, but because I wasn't sure my mother would comply. Diane Harlow had built her entire life around the careful maintenance of her image, the meticulous burying of her past. I'll make sure of it, I promised. She owes you that much. Rebecca nodded, seemingly satisfied. My doctor can send the initial blood work results to her oncologist. But if I'm a match, I'll need to travel to New York for the actual procedure, right? Yes. They'll explain everything once we know if you're compatible. For the first time, a hint of vulnerability showed through Rebecca's composed exterior. What if I'm not a match? What happens to her then? They'll keep looking for a donor. But honestly, her chances aren't good. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee absently. What was it like? Growing up with her as your mother? The question caught me off guard. For years, I'd nursed my resentments, focused on all the ways my mother had favored Serena, all the ways I'd fallen short. But now, faced with Rebecca's question, I found myself remembering other moments too. She was demanding, I said slowly. She had high expectations. Nothing less than perfection was acceptable. But she was also brave. Resilient. When my father's business failed, she started her own company from our kitchen table. She worked 16-hour days to keep us afloat. She taught me that women don't wait for anyone to save them, they save themselves. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. You respect her. I do, I realized, somewhat surprised by my own answer. Even when I wanted to hate her. I respected her strength. And did she? Rebecca hesitated. Did she ever talk about me? Even indirectly? I thought about the strange, silent anniversaries I'd noticed over the years. The days when my mother would withdraw, become distant and melancholy for no apparent reason. The box of letters I'd found, hidden away but not discarded, kept, after all those years. Not in words, I said truthfully. But there were moments, dates that seemed to hold meaning for her. May 17th, is that your birthday? Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. Yes. Every year, on that day, she would go alone to this little church near our house. She never took us with her. But once, when I was about 9, I followed her. She lit a candle and sat in a pew for an hour, just sitting. When she came out, her eyes were red. She was crying? Over me? Rebecca's voice was incredulous. I think so. I think she mourned you, in her own way. Rebecca looked away, blinking rapidly. That doesn't change what she did. No, I agreed. It doesn't. But maybe it means she's capable of facing it now. Of telling you the truth you deserve to hear. After a moment, Rebecca nodded. My doctor can see me this afternoon for the blood work. After that, I guess we wait. I need to go back to New York, I said. To tell my mother what I've done. To prepare her. Of course. Rebecca hesitated, then pulled out her phone. We should exchange numbers properly. For updates. As we programmed each other's information, I felt a strange sense of connection to this woman who was both a stranger and my sister. We had the same dark hair, the same determined set to our jaws. What else might we share? What other traits of my mother's had been passed to both of us, across time and distance? Olivia? Rebecca's voice pulled me from my thoughts. When you tell her about me, be gentle, okay? Not for her sake, but for yours. This can't be easy for any of you. Her empathy, despite everything, was unexpected and touching. I will, I promised. And Rebecca? Thank you. Not just for getting tested, but for being willing to hear me out at all. She gave me a small, guarded smile. Well, we're sisters, apparently. That has to count for something. As we parted ways outside the coffee shop, I felt a cautious hope unfurling inside me. Not just for my mother's survival, but for the possibility of a relationship with this newfound sister. A sister who seemed, in the brief time I'd known her, to possess a strength and dignity I could only admire, Now I just had to face my mother and tell her that her carefully guarded secret was about to be revealed. And that the daughter she'd given away might be the only one who could save her life. The hospital corridor stretched before me, its antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting all too familiar after weeks of visits. Outside my mother's room, I paused, gathering my courage. Through the small window in the door, I could see her, thin and pale against the white sheets, but still somehow formidable. She was reading, glasses perched on her nose, a frown of concentration creasing her brow. Diane Harlow, even in illness, was a force to be reckoned with. As I pushed open the door, she looked up, her expression softening slightly at the sight of me. "Olivia. There you are. Your sister's been beside herself." "Hello, Mother," I said, setting down my bag and taking the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Like someone's replaced my blood with concrete. But I'm still here." "Where have you been?" "Your father said something about a business trip, but that made no sense." "The doctor told you about the test results, didn't he? That neither of you girls is a match?" "Yes," I confirmed. "That's actually what I need to talk to you about." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is there to discuss?" "We'll keep looking for a donor. There's still time." "There might be a donor already," I said carefully. "Someone who's being tested right now." Hope flashed across her face. "Who? A cousin? One of your father's relatives?" "No." I took a deep breath. "It's Rebecca." My mother went very still. For a moment, I thought she might pretend not to know who I meant, might deny the existence of her firstborn daughter one more time. But then she closed her eyes, a shudder passing through her frail frame. "How?" she whispered. "How did you find her?" "Michael Crawford helped me." Her eyes flew open. "Michael? You went to Michael?" "Yes. And then I went to Seattle, where Rebecca lives. She's agreed to be tested. If she's a match, she'll donate." My mother's hands clutched at the blanket, her knuckles white. "Does your father know about this? Does Serena?" "Serena knows I found another sister. Dad doesn't know anything yet. I wanted to tell you first." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the window where gray skies threatened rain. "I never wanted you to know," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "Any of you. I've known since I was 12, Mother. I found the letters." Her head whipped around to face me. "What letters?" "The ones from Michael. Begging to see his daughter. You kept them in that carved box on the top shelf of your closet." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed swiftly by something that looked like shame. "You never said anything. You made me promise not to," I reminded her gently. "When I confronted you about it, you made me swear I'd never tell Dad or Serena." She closed her eyes again, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I was so afraid. For so long." "Afraid of what, Mother?" "Of losing everything. Your father. You girls. The life I'd built." She looked at me, her gaze suddenly intense. "You don't understand what it was like, Olivia. To be 17 and pregnant. My parents, they made it very clear what would happen if I didn't take care of the problem. They meant abortion, but when I refused, adoption was the compromise. But after? When you were an adult, you could have looked for her. And risked destroying my marriage?" Robert knew nothing about Rebecca. Nothing about Michael. As far as he was concerned, I was the perfect daughter from the perfect family who'd never put a foot wrong. So you just pretended she didn't exist? For 32 years? My mother's laugh held no humor. I never forgot her. Not for a single day. But yes, I pretended. I buried that part of my life so deeply that sometimes I could almost believe it had happened to someone else. And now? How do you feel, knowing I've found her? Knowing she might come here, to save your life? My mother turned away again, tears flowing freely now. I don't know how to feel, Olivia. Terrified. Grateful. Ashamed. All of it at once. I took her hand, surprised by its fragility. She wants to meet you, Mother. If she's a match. She wants the truth. The truth. My mother repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. After all this time. You owe her that much. I owe her far more than that. She sighed, seeming to deflate further. What is she like, this daughter of mine? Is she happy? She seems to be. She's a graphic designer. Successful, from what I could tell. She was raised by good people who loved her. My mother nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Good. That's good. Mother, I said carefully, there's something else we need to discuss. If Rebecca comes here, Dad and Serena will have questions. We need to decide how to handle this. Your father. She trailed off, a new fear entering her eyes. Olivia, this will destroy him. It doesn't have to. If you're honest with him. If you let him see that this happened before you even knew him. You don't understand. Our entire relationship is built on the image he has of me. The perfect wife. The perfect mother. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Mother, no one who's spent more than an hour with our family would describe you as the perfect mother. Her eyes flashed with familiar indignation. What is that supposed to mean? It means you're human. Flawed. Like all of us. Dad knows that. He's stayed with you for 30 years, through your moods, your cutting remarks, your impossible standards. He loves you, not some idealized version of you. She was quiet, absorbing my words. And Serena? She'll be devastated. She'll adjust. She doesn't have to be the center of the universe all the time. My mother's gaze sharpened. Is that what you think? That I made Serena the center of our universe? I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. Yes. For as long as I can remember, she was your golden child. Perfect Serena who could do no wrong, while I was always the disappointment. Pain flashed across my mother's face. Oh, Olivia. Is that how you saw it? How you felt? It's how it was, I said quietly. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I was harder on you because you reminded me so much of myself. Of my own strength. Serena was like your father, fragile, needing protection. But you were a survivor. Like me. Before I could process this revelation, my phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Just got the initial results. I'm a preliminary match. They need to do more tests, but doctor says it looks promising. My heart leaped. She's a match, I told my mother. Rebecca is a match. My mother's eyes filled with tears. The daughter I gave away might save my life, she whispered. While the one I kept has already saved my soul. 3 days later, I stood in the hospital lobby, waiting. The elevator doors opened, and Rebecca stepped out, looking nervous but determined. Behind her was Michael Crawford, his presence a surprise. I hope you don't mind, Rebecca said, hugging me briefly. I wanted him here. Of course, I assured her. She's ready to see you both. As we walked toward my mother's room, I thought about the strange circle we had completed. The lost daughter, returned. The forgotten love, remembered. The family secrets, finally exposed to light. When we reached the door, I stepped back. Take your time. I'll wait here. Rebecca nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. Michael followed, his hand supportive on her back. I sank into a chair, exhausted but peaceful. Whatever happened now, whether reconciliation or merely closure, the truth was finally free. And so, I realized, was I.